So, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this live Zoom with James Bancroft on his latest book about Charles Lightoller. Just an introduction to Barnform Publishing before we get going. We are now just over 1 year old, which is great. We are an independent publishing house. We mainly publish military history, but we are branching off into other sectors, genres. We have a property book in process at the moment. We've also done short fiction and poems, etc. So if you would like to potentially work with us, if you've got an idea you'd like to discuss, then please reach out either through social media or drop us an email at submissions@barnformpublishing.co.uk. Indeed, you can also look at our website, www.barnformpublishing.co.uk. So I'm going to hand over to James Bancroft now to introduce himself, tell us a bit about his background.
Okie dokie. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good. Yeah.
Oh, good. Do you mean about my personal life or how I got into writing?
So both a bit about your personal and professionally as well.
Right. Well, originally, when I was young, my interests were football and music. I lived I still live very close to Manchester City, Manchester United football grounds, and the family was split between the two teams. So I was very interested in football. I've done a couple of football books since. Music-wise, I went into professional music, but when I was 10 years old, I went to the local cinema and saw a film called Zulu, which Neil will know about, and I think nearly everybody in military history knows about. But that stayed at the back of my mind. I went into football and I went into music. Well, that was always at the back of my mind to do something about that subject. So when I had chance, I looked into particularly the Rorke's Drift. I kind of realised that there was only about 5 accounts left by people that were either in the battle or knew about the battle. So I sort of searched around to see if I could find any more. Came up with over 30 in the end, and put together my book, Rorke's Drift, the Zulu War 1879 in 1988. Well, from about 1986 to 88, I wrote it. So it was turned down 10 times by various publishers. So my oldest son suffered from asthma quite seriously. So one day he was having an asthma attack. When his attacks were quite bad, we had to get him to hospital quite quickly. And as we were getting ready to go to hospital, 3 letters fell onto my doorstep, through the door. So obviously at that time, I had an idea what they were. They were from publishers. I could just tell after so long getting turned down. Well, they were only second. No, they weren't very important that day because of the sun. So I picked them up, put them in my pocket. Off to hospital we went. By mid-afternoon, he was settled down. He was sitting in his bed, and I remembered them. Now my wife had already got fed up with seeing me after I'd been turned down. So I said, "Oh, I've got those 3 letters from publishers." So she said, "Well, this is my time to go for a cup of tea then. I don't want to know what they say." So the 11th one said, "Sorry, we're not interested." The 12th one was from Leo Cooper, Jolly Cooper's husband, who had the publishing company. And that actually, in a roundabout way, said, "Well, we don't want it, but I'm cutting it down. This was a bit longer than this, but it more or less in the end said, we don't want it, but when it's published, 2 people from our commissioning team want copies." So is that a yes or a no? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, the 3rd one was from a company called Spellmount, who are the history press now, I think. They took it on. They just said, "We'd like it. It fits in with what we want." And as you can, if you count 10, 11, 12, that was the 13th time I'd sent it. It's supposed to be unlucky, but it wasn't for me. So that was really how I started. That's that's how my writing career started, really. But as I say, I was more into football and music. But I was 50 years singing and playing music.
Hmm.
I only stopped doing it about 5 or 6 years ago, which was my main income. Um, so that was it. Mainly, my work comes from local history. It tends to start off with well, I have an archive now, quite a large archive, and um, the local history part came when I'm from Salford originally, and I started reading about the Titanic, and I found out that there was 10 people associated with Salford, my home city. 5 of them were born there. So I got interested in that, did some research, and got more and more interested in it. And so I sent to a publisher. Can I mention other publishers?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, you might as well.
Pen and Sword. And I sent it to them, and they said, "Well, it's not because it's local history. It's not long enough or widespread enough to for us to. But if you extend it, not to America, different countries, etc., we'd be interested in it. So I did that, and I eventually I found more, but I used 50 eyewitness accounts and people who were on the ship, and did my first book on the Titanic. Charles Lightoller came into that, obviously, although he wasn't because he's a Lancashire lad, and Salford used to be in Lancashire, so we are kind of two Lancashire lads, but we're Greater Manchester now. So he came into it a little bit. Then I did 2 more books, and then his life story was just so fascinating that I just zoomed in on him, and that's how this book came about.
Yeah, so let's start with him then. So for those that are not familiar with Charles Lightoller, give us a bit of a high level introduction to him.
Well, his famous thing was that he was the second officer on the Titanic. He was on the Titanic in the disaster. But previous to that, he had a fantastic life. Don't know if you call it fantastic. It was quite perilous, but he was shipwrecked 3 times. And one of the shipwrecks was on an island right in the middle of the Indian Ocean called St. Paul. He was on there for 9 days. After then he was rescued. Now, while he was on there, for some reason, he said that there was some buried treasure in one of the caves on the island, and he several times said he was going to go back and find this treasure. That he said he even got his wife and his 2 daughters, and they had a boat to go back and try and find this treasure. But I didn't find any evidence that he ever did. I don't think he ever did go back. He was in the Klondike when the gold rush was on. It was from 1897 to 1900. He was there in 1898 and didn't find anything. And the only thing he came back with was the banjo he'd used to keep his spirits up while he was not finding any gold. Another thing he did, which was quite naughty, was during the Boer War. He was on a ship. I think it was the Oceanic, actually, in Sydney, and the Boer War was raging at that time. So as a prank, I can't remember the name of the island, but there's an island in the middle of Sydney Harbour that was used as a fortress, and him and some friends raised a Boer flag and set off the cannon, so that the people in Sydney thought they were being attacked by Boer commando units. A long way for them to have gone, if it was true, but it did cause panic, and he didn't. It was in all the newspapers. If you look in the newspapers, you see that it's all there. But they didn't know who did it, because he got back on the ship and off they went. He didn't admit to it until 1936 when he was a commander. He just decided it was time to tell the truth, and he told the truth. But for all those years, nobody knew who had done it, but it was him and his friends. So it was a character in that way.
Yes.
So,
Oh, go on.
sorry,
So, I was going to say, so obviously before we get to the Titanic, so that was 1912, if I recall.
Yep.
What his maritime career leading up to that? How did he kind of start off and build up to his role at the time of the Titanic?
Well, he left. He just wanted to be a sailor. He always did. And he left home at the age of 14 to be a sailor. That's all he wanted to be. Moved up the ranks up to second officer, Oceanic. I can't remember any of the ships he was on actually, but he was on about 4 or 5. And he joined the White Star Line in 1900, and was part of the Royal Navy as well. And that's how he ended up to be on the Titanic.
So you mentioned so obviously he was the second officer on the Titanic, but that changed very shortly before they embarked on the infamous voyage. Can you explain how that all came about?
He was third officer when the ship was built. So when they sent for people to officers for the ship, it was a man called Davy Blair who was second officer in Belfast. He was third officer. And even he didn't know the reason for this, but when they got from Belfast to Southampton, when they got to Southampton, Captain Smith and another officer, they took them on. And for some reason, Davy Blair was taken off the ship with the keys, by the way, for the binoculars they should have had on the crow's nest. He was taken off, and Charles Lightoller they all moved up one. So Charles Lightoller became second officer. But as I say, even he didn't know the reason why. It just says that the people, the hierarchy of the company, that's what they wanted, so that's what they did.
Yeah. No, so in some ways fortunate. Would it have been much of a role change? What's the kind of difference between like a second and third officer?
Not a lot, to be honest. As he said himself, whatever your position was on the ship, you just had to do as you were told. Where it was necessary for you to do something, you had to do it. So, as I said, there was seven officers and the captain. And in his words, he just said it didn't really matter what you were. If you were told to do something, you just did it. There's no point in saying, "No, I don't want to do that." You just went along and did it, whatever it was.
Hmm. I mean, and that comes across in the book. You can tell he's definitely a very dutiful, chap, and he plays it by the book,
Yeah.
or despite the commando raid, perhaps. But so on the fateful night that the Titanic sunk, what was his part in events? How did the evening play out for him?
Well, again, the officers kind of knew when the boat started tilting quite quickly, because there was 300 feet of the starboard side of the ship was ripped open. So the water was coming in really quick. So he said himself, when he was actually in his cabin when it hit the iceberg, and he came out of his cabin, and as he was walking to the bridge, he said even then he could feel the ship tilting. And he just thought, this is really more serious than I thought it was. And when he was chatting with the other officers, they felt the same way. They felt it's going down quick, this. So it was only 5 minutes from them realising how serious the situation was that they started taking the tarpaulin off the lifeboats. And that was again, as I say, they just had to do it. Nobody, they knew what was happening. Nobody said, you need to do this, you need to do that. They just went and did it. So all the officers were just taking off the tarpaulin and getting the boats ready to get the people off. That was the first thing he did. And he was on the boat right until near the end. And he actually did go down with the ship so far. But he was the blast. Something happened down in the ship, and he was kind of attached to a kind of funnel, and the explosion happened, it blew him away. It actually saved his life. If he'd have stayed where he was, he just would have gone down. The ship would have sucked him down with it. But it blew him up, blew him away, and he swam to an upturned, well, they were like dinghies. There was 16 lifeboats and 4 dinghies, and he got in one of them, onto one of them with several other people, and that's how he got away from the boat.
Because if I recall correctly, he obviously before that happened, he kind of turned down an opportunity to get in one of the boats, if that's right.
No. He, as I say, he was blasted away from the ship, and luckily was close enough to this upturned boat to get. Unless you mean that, he did get on the boat, but it was upturned. It was on. It was. He was on the hull of it with several other people, and that's how they got away from the ship. I don't think he was ever. He probably got in an upright boat closer to the Carpathia, where the Carpathia came, but he mainly got away from the ship on the hull of an upturned dinghy.
Yeah, and because he
was there for quite some time as well, 4 hours.
Because he was playing quite a pivotal role, really, in the kind of direction, as you say, as they were uncovering the boats in preparation to evacuate. More crew members were turning up, and he was pointing them in different directions. All right, you guys do that boat, and so on. And I think there was also a decision made about that they were going to lower a boat to a window or something like that.
Yeah, that was number 4. Well, he tried to lower it down, and it got stuck, so he left that there, and then went doing something else. And then when the ship got so far down, they had to use that boat. They had to get through the windows at the side of the boat to get onto that boat. But they had a lot of difficulty in trying to get the people, particularly the women, to get into the boats, which you can understand because it was supposed to have been unsinkable. It was a massive ship. And they were asking women to leave their husbands and to get into a little boat, sail off into the ocean. Although it was a calm night, but to sail off into the ocean and leave a massive unsinkable, as they thought, unsinkable ship. And they had difficult. Excuse me. Some of the women wouldn't get in. They wanted to stay on the boat. They lost their lives. But they found it very difficult to get them to get into the boats because they, as I've just said, they didn't think such a boat like that would sink.
Unsinkable, like you say.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got to this evening mention the famous movie Titanic. How is his character portrayed in that film as such?
Right. Well, I can't answer that very well because I've never actually seen the film from beginning to end. I've never really watched it, and I don't know who played him. I've watched bits of it, but I've not watched it all the way through. So I'm afraid that one's difficult to answer. I don't really know. I know the like the film Zulu captured the atmosphere, even though it had a lot of mistakes in it. It captured the atmosphere, and I don't believe anybody will be able to catch that atmosphere again. I think the same thing applies to the film Titanic. They did catch the atmosphere. From what I've seen, there are still they've used artistic license quite a lot in that film as well. So they captured the atmosphere, but I don't really know. I can't really answer how he was portrayed because I didn't really see it that much.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I'm definitely, it's on my list to rewatch. Obviously, having read the book several times through, I feel like I need to contrast it now. But he obviously going back to the real events. So after he's obviously survived the event, he's actually one of the key surviving witnesses then for what would become an inquiry into the events around the sinking. Kind of, what can you tell us about his role in that inquiry and how it's covered within the book?
Right. Well, he was being the second officer. he was he was quite well. Well, his words. These are his words. That never to be forgotten ordeal, which was carried out in Washington and repeated in England, and he didn't like it. None of them liked it, and you can tell by some of his answers that you can actually feel that he was worried about what he had to say back. He was very careful, and if he could answer in only one word, that's what he did: yes, no, or whatever. Because they didn't want to to take any kind of blame for what had happened. It was massive, of course. Now his role in the inquiry was quite long, and he was asked a lot of questions. And when I was putting the book together, I wasn't quite sure, because it takes up quite a lot of the book, and I wasn't quite sure whether to put it in or not. But I'd put it in and think, oh, that looks okay. Then I'd think, well, if I take it out, it looked like something was missing, so it kind of needed to be in the book. So in the end, I just decided I'm going to leave it in, because it was relevant to everything that happened. But a couple of times I did think, shall I leave it out? And I've only done the British inquiry, his answers to that. He was also quizzed in America as well, but I haven't put that in, because I felt that it started only 5 days after the disaster, but the British one started a few weeks after. So I thought he had more time to think about what had happened. So I just put, and I didn't want to have it too long of just the inquiries. So I left the American inquiry out. It's not much different to the British one, and I put the British one in. So that was how I made my mind up about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've just picked up the book, so I'm just going to read a brief extract just to give a flavour of his answers. So he said, so he's asked, what is the sort of time you're off duty? He replies, half an hour. I think that it is 7:05 to 7:35, as near as I remember. And who took your place when you were off duty? Mr. Murdoch, the first officer. You knew nothing of the Californian message at all. Nothing whatever. Then the last message, the Masaba message, according to the evidence given, which would reach the ship about 10 o'clock. Yes. That is when you should be changing watch and Mr. Murdoch would be taking your place. Yes. And as you say,
exactly, yeah.
There are a load of one-word answers where possible.
Yeah, he really explains himself quite well. But where that was good, one other thing I did notice, I don't think I've covered it in the book, I'm not quite sure, but there were 4 hours on and 4 hours off. That was usually what the usual routine was. Now, I like my sleep, so I thought to myself that's not going to be 4 hours of sleep. That's only a nap, isn't it? Really, it's not really a proper sleep. So they were having to make really, really serious judgments on 4 hours sleep, and I don't think I could do that if it was be truthful. It was, and it has been mentioned. I mean, it has been mentioned in some places that there was some element of sleep deprivation as well that wouldn't have helped them making those really serious decisions when people's lives depended on it.
Yeah, definitely must have been a factor. So we'll leave behind the events of the Titanic for now, because obviously, as the title of the book suggests, Titanic to Dunkirk. Titanic is but the beginning, really. So the First World War arrives, obviously not long after 1912, and he is at the time a lieutenant in the Royal Naval Reserve, and he is then called up to the Royal Navy. So what's his First World War like?
Well, he was quite long actually, but to cut it down a little bit, he was part of the Dover Patrol, and he was on ships attacking submarines and zeppelins, so up in the air and under the water as well. And he was so gallant that he was awarded Distinguished Service Cross, and in 1916 and in 1918 he was awarded a bar to his medal. So he had a very gallant and distinguished First World War. Now, one of the things I put in the book, which his wife Sylvia, she came from Australia. He met her when he was in Australia. He met her actually not long after the prank that he did. Now they came to live in England, and when the war started and the Anzacs came over, the Australian and New Zealand troops, both she and he, they left. They lived in Dover, and they left the door open to anybody who needed a night's skip or whatever. Particularly for the Australian and New Zealand troops, and they just left. Anybody could go there anytime they wanted, and they would be welcomed to go in and and have something to eat, drink, sleep, whatever they wanted. She left. In other words, she left the door open to anybody who needed them. I mean, she didn't get a medal for that, of course, but it was a gallant thing to do and a good thing to do.
Oh, definitely, and I guess that theme carries on nicely to his eventual role in the Second World War. Obviously, between the two world wars, he finds retirement, but that's kind of short-lived with the start of the Second World War. So pick up the story from there. What happens in his Second World War?
Well, in about the mid 1920s, they wanted a cruise ship to tour Europe. So just in the Medway, they just came across this boat that seemed to have just been left there. It still belonged to the Royal Navy, but it just been left there. It was sinking into the sand, and they bought it from the Navy for £400. It's quite expensive then, I suppose, to do it up. So they did it up, and Sylvia called it the Sundowner, and they did use it to tour around Europe. And they had 3 sons and 2 daughters who went with them. Now, I think it was 1938, 1939, when the war seemed imminent, because they had such experience of going around Europe, particularly around northern Germany. He was asked to go along the coast of Germany while he was in kind of a spy, I suppose, or to make notes of what was going on. And so Sylvia sat on the top of the deck knitting or reading a book, while he was down in the ship taking photographs and making notes for, if needed, for the war. And then in 1940, when Dunkirk happened, and all the troops were left stranded on the beaches of Dunkirk. They tried to they got together hundreds of ships called the little ships to go over to try and get them off as soon as they could, because the Germans were strafing them with fire. And they came to Lightoller and said, we're commissioning your ship to go and do this job. Take it down to Ramsgate, and the Royal Navy, some Royal Navy personnel will take it over and take it over to Dunkirk. So he said, there's absolutely nobody is guiding this ship anywhere. Anywhere, only me. I'll take it over. So either I take it or you're not having it. Although I don't think he had the power to do that. I think they could have took it off him anyway, but they agreed with him. They said, okay, fair enough, you can do it. He said, I've got a son. My son will come with me. Incidentally, by that time, he'd already lost a son. One of his sons, he was killed in the first week of the war. He'd already lost him. So he was taking everything out. He's filling the bath with fresh water, filling the tanks with fresh water. And this young lad came walking along. I said, what are you doing? He was a scout. He said, what are you doing? He said, I'm I'm taking everything out of the boat, making as much room as I can. So, because I've got to go over to Dunkirk to bring the troops home. And he just said he was a scout in somewhere in your area, actually, I think it is Mortlake.
Oh
He
yeah,
was, he was Mortlake Scouts. He was in the Scouts. His actual name was Gerald Ashcroft. And he said, "Can I come with you?" So he said, "Well, yeah, you can come with me, but it's not going to be a boat trip. It's going to be hard." So I won't mind coming here. So he took him. He went with him. So him, Charles Lightoller, his son, and this scout went off to Dunkirk, and he got 130 men on his boat. He'd actually had, when they first found it in the mud, and they were doing it up, they extended it a bit. I think it was about 6 to 8 feet. They extended it, which was fortunate because he got 130 men in it and brought them back. And actually, when he got back into Ramsgate, there was a petty officer stood there, and as they were all getting off, he said, "Bloody hell, where have you put them all?"
yeah.
But that's what he did. And then his son Roger, who went with him, he was killed later on in the war. He was killed in the Royal Navy. So he lost 2 sons in the war, saved 130 lives and lost 2 sons. So, quite tragic. Quite tragic, really.
And I think were his daughters also serving in the Second World War as well? Were playing their part.
Yeah, they did actually. I'm afraid I can't remember the units they were in, but they actually did. All 5 of his children served, and he lost 2 of them.
An incredible family in all senses.
Well,
Um,
they did the bit, certainly did the bit. So,
Definitely, yeah. So obviously, you kind of alluded to this in terms of the area at the time. So the scout was from Mortlake. So how is Lightoller remembered today, like commemoration wise?
well, the 2 that I found, in particular, well, apart from the fact that Sundowner is still, it's actually been, I can't remember the name of the boatyard, but it's been repaired and done up in a boatyard not far from yourself. I think you've told me you.
Yeah, I've so it's in Chertsey, which is not
Yeah, that's it.
far
Yeah.
away.
I'm northerner, so I'm not familiar with some of the areas.
Yeah, well, I've tried
But
contacting the owner. They haven't come back to me. But if they happen to watch this, then yeah, I'd be certainly interested to come and have a look.
that was the last information I knew about the actual boat. It's still, with some repairs, it can still be used. He lived in Chorley in Lancashire. He was born in Chorley and he lived in Chorley till he was 14 when he went into the Navy. And the house where he lived is called the Firs, and it's kind of it's not far from where I am actually. It's on Bolton Road. A few years ago now, they had a plaque put up there. The house is not there anymore. It's a school now. And on the school gates, they've got a plaque to say that was the house where Charles Lightoller, who was second officer on the Titanic, that's where he used to live. He lived there the picture that I've got in the book was taken in 1900, so around about that time. But it happened to be the first house in Chorley to have electric lighting fitted in it. So that's there. There's a blue plaque there, no other round blue plaques. And there's quite a significant one down where, because towards the end of his life, with his surviving son, he started a boat building and boat maintenance company in Twickenham. It was called Duck Walk. I don't know why it was called that, but where he used to maintain launches for the police, the London police. And on Duck Walk, there's quite a significant one, telling you quite a bit about who he was and his quite a bit of some of the things that he did, particularly the Titanic, and particularly what he did down there when he first went down there to start the company that he started. And his wife Sylvia did it with him. His surviving son, his wife, and they all lived above the boatyard where they fixed the boats. He did that until 1952 when he died.
Yeah, I'll have to go down the river there for at some point to have a look. Yeah, as you say, it's not a million miles away. Um, just a quick reminder for the live audience. If you have any questions, now's the time to start thinking of them. We're nearing the end of the talk, so you'll have your chance shortly. So James, obviously, you are a prolific author, many titles before now. What's in the pipeline at the moment?
Right, well, well, for yourselves, you've got the gunfight at the OK Corral. That's for yourselves, as you will know. One of my uncles, my uncle James, he was he had quite a lively time during the Second World War, and Neil and I have discussed that. At the moment, that project is just called Uncle James. I don't know where it will end up. He was a gunner with Royal Artillery at home, and then he was in. He went over to fight in Europe afterwards. I've got next year. There's quite a big exhibition of the Titanic in Manchester. So I'm doing a book. It's not connected with it, but I'm doing a book called Titanic: The Greater Manchester Connections, which is about I think about 32, 33 people. I mentioned the 10 from Salford earlier, who had some connection with what is now the Greater Manchester County, used to be Lancashire. About them, as I say, it's not associated with that, but I'm hoping to do it at that time, so people will have some idea of the local. Apart from the Titanic interest, there were so many local people from their area were actually on the boat. I presume they'll cover that anyway, some of them, but they won't cover them all because I found some that no one knows about. And then in the future, although it's taking a lot more research than I expected, I'm doing a book about the 65 men who were on the Antarctic with Scott, Captain Scott. It wasn't just the 5 who died. There were 65 altogether that were associated in some way with the Antarctic. So, but that's going to take me quite a while because I want to properly research that one. Which I'm not saying I don't anyway, but that's taking up quite a lot of time.
Yeah, and that's some range of subjects, isn't it? You're covering all sorts of history there.
I'm interested in British history. Having said that, as I've just mentioned, I'm doing one on the gunfight at the OK Corral, which was in America, as you know, and I've just done one on the Alamo last year. If it touches my interest, and I have the JWB archive that I've been putting together for over 50 years. So I want to try and do as many books as I can using that before I'm not here anymore to do any more. You know what I mean? I don't want it to just be stuck in a drawer. I want it to be for people to read it. So that's what I do. I have a lot of interest, mostly British. Any British history I'm interested in. I'm becoming a bit of a pacifist now, though. I've done a lot of military history, but with the way the world is going now, I don't think you need to write about war anymore. There's too much of it around. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm becoming a bit of a pacifist in my thoughts.
Well, we'll see. There's plenty of road ahead yet, so we'll see what happens.
Well, I'm also I've sent Neil a synopsis of a children's book I've been writing since 1979. It's called Time Water Bridge. It's about 2 children who go back in time, and I use my knowledge of history in that as well. I'm not going too much into detail. Neil's seen a synopsis of it, and he said it looks okay, but I keep changing it. So one day when I think, well, that's ready to go, I'll probably do something with that.
Great stuff. So just to conclude then, obviously, if for those wanting to read this book, and a bit biased, but I would definitely recommend it. You can purchase a copy on our website directly, and that helps obviously supporting an independent publisher such as ourselves. You can also buy it on Amazon, particularly if you're an international customer, although we can arrange international shipping. Um, so I'm now going to give the live audience opportunity to ask any questions that they may have. I think Andrew's just popped his hand up. Do you want to chip in, Andrew? You're on mute at the moment. Peter, Andrew's not responding at the moment, so we'll come back to Andrew, but go ahead.
James, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I can't wait to buy the book from Barnthorpe and will be doing so. A couple of questions just sprung to mind. I suppose it may even generate into three questions. The first question was, with all this adventure, how did he fund himself to be able to buy the old Navy boat and start sailing around between the wars? You know, because that wouldn't have been a cheap thing to do, I guess.
Well, I've no evidence that he did anything else other than be in the Merchant Navy, in the Royal Navy. So
yeah,
it's got to be like. I mean, Sylvia wasn't. I don't really know much about Sylvia's financial situation, but I think some of it may have come from her side of the family.
right. Okay.
I didn't go too much into that, of course, because it was about him, not her.
Yeah.
Although she was a fellow, you know, she did a lot in her life as well. But to answer the question, I think probably some of it came from, or the majority of it came from her side of the family, her side of the family.
Yeah. Did the second question? Did you get a sort of sense of him as a person? Would you have liked to have met him? Would he be in good company? You know, what sort of guy was he?
Well, I think he was a bit too busy to talk to anyone. Yeah, no. One thing I've always thought, and you'll probably agree, the amount of things that he did, I'm surprised there's not been a film about him.
Absolutely.
Even before the Titanic, you know, I mean, the things that he did, he was an amazing man, and he didn't live far. And I mean, Charlie is 10 miles from where I live.
Yeah.
So it was a Lancastrian. Well, they could do that in them days. They could get up to all sorts. There was a lot of things that hadn't been done. So it must have been. It was a hell of a sailor. Well, he must have been a right character, particularly when he have the nerve to do what he did when in Sydney Harbour with the boat thing. Even to think of it, to think of something like that, you know, he's got to be a rum lad to do something like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And the Dover Patrol stuff. I mean, that on his own is a story, isn't it?
Yeah. And he did do it on his own as well. He just when he saw the Zeppelins, he just got a Hotchkiss gun that they had on the ship on the boat.
Yeah,
manned it and shot it. I can't remember if he shot it down or no, he didn't shoot it down. He shot at it, and they just. It seems like a good shot. This fella and turned it around and went.
Brilliant. But no, thank you so much for writing this book, and obviously for the publishers as well for getting it out there, because it's going to be I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you, James.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your
question.
Peter.
Thanks, Peter. Andrew, can you chip in now?
Yeah, I think I've got there. I think.
Yep, you're right. Yeah.
I was just wondering, sort of related to Peter's question, I think maybe. How do you think once Knights Remember came out and he became more and more known to the general public, did he have an issue or a problem or basically I'm saying, how did he adapt to the more widely I'll call it notoriety? He didn't do anything wrong. How did he adapt to people knowing more about him as a person? You know, because I don't think, from the sound of it, I don't think he was one for particularly hiding his light under a bushel, but I don't think he courted publicity either. Did that change for him once the books and the film started coming out?
Well, I think by that time, the mid-1930s, he was over 60. He'd retired, and it just seems to be logged into that time, the mid-1930s, when he brought his book out. He admitted to the thing he did in Sydney Harbour. He went on radio in a program called I Was There and told his story. And in 1950, he did the same thing again. So I think when he got older, he wasn't, I don't think he was much for publicity before that, but it just seems to be in that time, mid-1930s, he thought, oh, I think I'll just tell people, about myself and that. So as I said, he did the book. He admitted to what he'd done he didn't get done for that, by the way.
He would have been these days.
I didn't prosecute him because it just said, oh. In fact, thinking back now, he did tell somebody. He told somebody at the White Star Line, because that's who he was working for at that time, and he said they just laughed and said, "Don't do it again. That's just what's a silly thing to do. Don't do that again." Yeah, but to answer your question, I think it was after he was about 60, mid-1930s. There were 4 examples I've just given, where he seems to have thought, "Oh, I'm just going to tell them, just going to put myself out there, and that's what happened." So,
I suppose you get to a sort of age where you don't care really if people take issue or whatever, not necessarily Lightoller, but you get to that age, don't you? If people don't like it, then that's just tough luck, sort of thing, So, and what could they do anyway? That's what's going to ask.
Yeah, well, it was a long time previous, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
1930s.
You said that you hadn't seen, and nor have I, to be honest with you. I'll hold my hand up here. I haven't watched Titanic because the bits I've seen of it, I didn't really care for, but that's another matter. But have you seen any other portrayals of him, like in A Night to Remember? And if you have, do you think he was captured fairly in that? No, I'm thinking of the way other people in history have been portrayed. Like Henry Hook in Zulu, when they sort of like character assassinated him as a person. Do you think Lightoller was portrayed fairly in Night to Remember, from what if you haven't seen it, from what you've heard of it or whatever?
Well, they used a lot of artistic license to do that in all the films, don't they?
Yes, they do.
So again, I have to be honest. I've not seen Night to Remember. I don't really watch films that much. I'm not really a film buff. I've read the book.
Yeah.
Again, he's portrayed okay, but with some artistic license.
The book itself, was it Walter Lord wrote the book, didn't he? I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Walter Lord. Yeah,
and he's quite a fair author, isn't he? By and large, too.
Well, he had a lot of help from people who, I think Sylvia, his wife, had something to do with it, and there's quite a few of them that survived. They had some say in it. Again, off the top of my head, I can't remember which ones they were. But there's quite a few people that were involved in the actual sinking and that were there. He had help from them, so you would presume it was quite true to what happened, as much as it could be.
Yeah. Final question, I may, and then I'll let other people get in or whatever. This is sort of like off the wall something, but you'll have probably been aware of the various. There was a book about it, wasn't there, released some time ago as well, about this whole. It wasn't the Titanic that sank; it was a sister ship, and they just made it up, sort of thing. And there was a fire all along in the bunkers, and that's what did for the Titanic and whatever. Have you come? I'm assuming the expert that you are, you've come across these conspiracy theories. Have you ever had people who actually believe that it wasn't the Titanic that sank and so on? Have you come across that?
Well, in one of my books that I did, I've not even mentioned the thing about the two ships. I just don't believe that at all. Long story, that, isn't it? It's a bit long to
It is.
But I do believe that there was a fire, because there's too many eyewitness accounts that said that there was a fire, and the men who struggled to put it out, they never put it out. It blazed until the watch came in. So, and that's people who eyewitness accounts. That's not just what I've read in books or on a film or anything. people who actually struggled to keep it under control anyway, left accounts that's what happened. So based on that, I think I believe that. But I'm not sure about the two ships thing. I don't know.
Yeah, that's tosh, isn't it? How common would that have been in steamships of that size for fires? For fires in the bunkers. Was that a relatively rare thing? Was it sort of thing that you had to be trained for? In your experience, as far as you've been able to make out?
I've not read anything about that it happened before, but there seemed to be so many shipwrecks and boats coming down at that time, because it was one of the main ways of moving things around the world. So it probably, although I don't really know the answer to that. I've not really read anything that a ship particularly went down because. Well, I mean, the Titanic didn't go down for that reason, did it?
No.
In fact, what happened to the Titanic put the fire out. But as I say, it still smouldered for quite a long time.
Interesting. Thank you very much for your replies. Thank you for that.
Hello, it's Alan. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know.
Yeah, we can hear you, Alan. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. No, thanks very much. That was a great presentation. Can I ask again? Can I ask a question about Titanic? Firstly, in A Night to Remember, in the film The Night to Remember, Lightoller is portrayed by Kenneth More. So it's obviously quite a famous British film actor of the 1950s. Also portrayed Douglas Bader. So he was portrayed in the movie A Night to Remember in a very heroic fashion, in a sort of 1950s heroic fashion. And I know that later historians have been quite critical of Lightoller's role in the evacuation of the Titanic. And I wondered maybe if you might comment on that, because it has been remarked that 70% of the passengers that left the Titanic were evacuated by Murdoch, who was the officer in charge of the lifeboats on the other side of the ship. And on Lightoller's side of the ship, only 30% of passengers that survived were evacuated. And I think, as you said in one of your during your presentation, many of the lifeboats were launched half empty. In fact, one lifeboat only had 12 people, and a lifeboat could hold about 60 or 70 people. So I don't know if you've got any views on Lightoller's approach to the evacuation of passengers, and why he was so insistent that it could only be women and children, even though there were no women and children available. He still wasn't willing to allow men to actually go into the lifeboats.
Yeah. Well, what seemed to happen was the boats that had less people in were the boats that were first being launched. I mean, he was there right from the start. As soon as, I think it was lifeboat 6 that went first. He was there right from the start, and he was there uncovering them. But what happened was, as I mentioned earlier, they were reluctant to get into the boats early on. So if you look at it, it probably comes over in the book, but I mean, it does come over in some other things as well, even on the internet. They wouldn't get in the boats at first, but as the boat was going down, it was sinking, and they started realising that it was going to sink. There was more people getting in them, so the boats that were people getting in at the beginning were the ones that didn't have so many in them. But if you come towards the end, the last 4 or 5 lifeboats, they were quite full. But I have read, and I am going to put it in the book I'm going to do next year. I have read that the experts who and the ones who built the lifeboat and the guys who were involved in the building of the ships and the building of lifeboats, they say that even though they said 65 people, it could hold 65 people. They say it could only hold, each lifeboat could really only hold 40 in safety. They could pile 65 in, but the safety level was about 40. So, and this these guys, same guys, and it's not in this book, but it's in a book I'm going to do for Bath. They say, fortunately, it was the sea was calm that night. Now, had the sea been rough, they wouldn't have been able to launch any of the lifeboats. They wouldn't have been able to do it. It wasn't allowed. They couldn't have done it. It wasn't because of the way the tackle was. They couldn't do it. So they were fortunate that it was level sea, so they could launch the lifeboats, and in safety, feasibly, they should have only been 40 in each boat.
I just wonder though about that evacuation, because I just so happened to be at a Titanic exhibition in Glasgow just last week. It's probably the one that's going to Manchester soon. I think you mentioned that.
Yeah, that's July next year, that is.
Yes, it's probably going around the country. And I was really struck by the numbers of third-class passengers that drowned or froze to death in the sea. You know, there really was a difference between, you know, most of the first-class women were evacuated, most of the second-class women, I think, got off, but and some first and second-class men, but not many. But what really struck me was the numbers of third-class men, women, and children that perished. You know, it really was quite striking, and it does really you know, you do wonder, you ask questions about the role of the officers on the ship and how they
I
conducted
don't
that
think that
evacuation.
was anything to do with the personal opinions of the officers or what they thought. I think that was more to do with where they were in the ship. The third-class passengers were further down into the depths of the ship, and I think it just took them longer to get up there. But I must admit, the first, I don't know how many, but the first quite a few boats that were launched were first-class passengers.
Yes, yeah.
You don't really see any third-class passengers coming onto the scene until four, five, six boats had already been launched. So you do have a point there, but I don't think it was anything to do with the how the officers felt. I think it was just where they were situated in the boats, and I have seen on the film that some of the places, the passageways were gated off. Now, I've not really read anything by an eyewitness that has said that. I don't know if that's true or not. That was in the film. I saw in the film. I've never read anything by anybody who was on the ship that said that. My view of that is just it wasn't what the officers had an opinion about that. It was just that where they were on the ship. That's what I think. I don't know if I'm right, but that's what I think. I think it was just that they were so far down in the depths of the ship. The second-class passengers were nearer to the boat decks, and the first-class passengers were nearer still to the boat decks. Another thing that happened was the first-class passengers, they had a room just below the boat deck where they could play cards and that. And I have noticed from another book I'm doing next year that they were all first-class passengers in the first couple of boats, and a lot of them were playing cards in that room when the ship started going down.
Yeah.
I've put the publisher that I'm doing it for, they said, we don't really want to know about what they did afterwards or what they did before. We want to know just what they did on the ship. So I've had to zoom in on that. And one of the things I did notice was that a lot of them were just playing cards, you know, so they happened to be just not far away from the boat decks where the boats were. And that's why they got on first.
Yeah. So can I just answer one last question? Again, you mentioned the inquiries, the American inquiry and the British inquiry. And of course, Lightoller was the senior surviving officer, wasn't he? He was okay. And that obviously had a degree of responsibility because he essentially was the voice of the White Star Line. And obviously the White Star Line's reputation would obviously you know, was badly damaged by the sinking, and one might argue that White Star were criminally culpable in some of the actions of the captain, perhaps. And so Lightoller was really I guess, portraying White Star in the best possible light. He essentially was, and I just wondered if and essentially did the company a good turn. And I wondered if that was reflected in his subsequent career with Light Star. You know, White
Yes,
Star.
yes, it was.
Did he go on to command?
None of the officers
Yeah,
who survived, four officers survived.
yeah,
None of them were given a senior position on a White Star ship ever again afterwards.
right. I'm
So
just
that,
wondering with Lightoller, the fact that he really essentially represented the company in those hearings and did quite a good job actually in trying to bolster the company's reputation. I wondered if for Light that didn't result in Lightoller being um given promotion or perhaps given a ship's command. Nothing like that.
no, as I say, of the four that survived, none of them were ever given a senior position again in White Star
Yeah.
in the White Star Line Company. I just feel that during the inquiry, I think, and I don't blame him, but I think all the officers tended to try. They were defending themselves. You know, it came over that they were speaking. They were defending the White Star Line as well. But I would have done the same. The situation was very strange, and I think, you know, as I said earlier, the answers that they gave were very, very thought of answers. Yes, no, maybe, you know. And as I said, they hated doing that inquiry.
Yeah.
All four officers hated going to the American one and to the British one. They just didn't want to do it. So, and I just think they defended themselves as best they could, because some of the questions were not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't believe half of the questions they were asked necessarily needed to be asked, and you kind of get the feeling that the people who were questioning them were probing them.
Yeah.
You know, in some cases, particularly the American one, trying to get them to make mistakes. I can't remember what the legal word is for, but, you know, incriminate themselves.
Yeah.
In some way. That's in my view. I felt that when I read them. I read both, although I've only put the British one in the book.
Yeah.
I read the American one and the British one, and as I say, they're not much different. And you just get the feeling, and then you get the feeling that the officers felt the same way, that they were trying to get them to trip up, to incriminate themselves in some way. So that's why they were giving just fairly abrupt. Sometimes they explained themselves, particularly when it was about how the boat, what their job was on the boat. But when it came to what happened after, you know, during the crisis, they're very, very cagey, and I don't blame them.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
I think they were defending themselves as much as the White Star Line, and I don't blame them for that, because they were under a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, thanks very much. That was really interesting. Some really interesting responses there. Thank you very much.
I presume you know that Murdoch was a Scotsman. You will know that, won't
you? No, that was great. Yes. So no, thanks very much.
Fact,
look forward to reading the book. Thank you.
One part I do remember about the film was he was portrayed in a bad way, and again,
James Murdoch.
Murdoch was, and I think it was from Dalbeattie, and they actually got somebody to do with the film to go to Dalbeattie to apologise for the way he was portrayed in the film.
Well, he was actually in the movie, in James Cameron's movie, Murdoch committed suicide.
No,
he shot
not.
one of the passengers who was trying to storm the lifeboats, and then shot himself. But I know there were rumours that an officer did shoot himself, and James Cameron thought that was most likely to be James Murdoch, but he could never prove it. So that's why.
Exactly. And it's a little bit the Murdoch thing. I think I've mentioned it in the book, actually, or one of the books. The Murdoch situation is very similar to the Hook situation at Rorke's Drift. It was just artistic license. They had to make someone notorious, for want of a better word, for the sake of the film,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's not fair.
No, that's right. And I don't think James Cameron could sort of substantiate it.
He couldn't, as I say, when they sent some people from the film company to his hometown to actually they sent him there to apologise, but the people said that it's not really an apology that he did, and he donated some money towards something. I can't remember what it was now. The film guy, but Murdoch, in my view, wasn't portrayed correctly in the film.
No. Okay, no, thank you very much. That was excellent. I really enjoyed that presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the
I
questions.
hope to read the book.
Yes, sure, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for all of the questions. We're going to draw things to a close now. As a reminder, the book is available on our website, barnthornepublishing.co.uk, and on Amazon. And I think just to close, probably one of my favourite kind of parts in the book is where there's a couple of chaps on there who have managed to get on board the Sundowner. Well, 2 of the 130.
Oh yeah, I know what you're going to say.
And word gets around that this is Lightoller of the Titanic, and one of the chaps is inclined to jump off and swim for it and take his chances, but the point is raised. Well, if he survived the Titanic, then we've got a pretty good chance here, and so it turned out to be.
Yeah, good point.
But yeah, thank you very much, James. Very informative, and yeah, we'll hopefully see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.